What would you do if you lost someone you loved and then refused to leave their side for days, even as the world just kept moving on without you? In 2016, researchers in Kenya witnessed something that genuinely stopped them in their tracks, something that challenged everything we thought we knew about animal emotion. A female elephant named Eleanor had collapsed near a watering hole. She was old, she was weak, her body was failing. But what happened next wasn't really about Eleanor. It was about the ones who loved her. Within hours, elephants from 5 different family groups started arriving, and they didn't rush in. They approached Eleanor's body slowly, deliberately. They touched her with their trunks. They pushed against her gently, as if trying to wake her up. One female named Grace stood beside Eleanor for nearly an hour, just rocking back and forth in what researchers could only describe as distress. When Eleanor finally died, the elephants didn't leave. They stayed. For days. Some came back repeatedly over the following weeks, revisiting the bones, touching them, standing in silence. This wasn't instinct. This wasn't confusion. This was grief. And the question it raises is one that science is only now, honestly, beginning to seriously grapple with. Do animals mourn their dead? And if they do, could their grief actually last longer than our own? For most of scientific history, we just avoided this question entirely. Grief was considered a uniquely human experience, a product of our complex language, our cultural rituals, our awareness that we're going to die someday. Researchers who suggested that animals might feel genuine sorrow were often dismissed as sentimental or unscientific, or both. The dominant view was that animal behavior after death could be explained by simpler mechanisms. Confusion, instinct, chemical signals, anything but actual emotion. And look, this perspective had a name. Scientists call it anthropocentric bias. We measured animal minds against our own and found them lacking. We assumed that without language, there could be no inner life worth studying. But here's the thing. That assumption was never actually based on evidence. It was based on discomfort. Because if animals could grieve, really grieve, it would mean they could suffer in ways we had been ignoring for a very long time. And that would require us to change how we treat them, which is a deeply uncomfortable place to end up. Over the past 3 decades, though, the science has shifted dramatically. Researchers now approach grief not as some cultural construct unique to humans, but as a neurological and evolutionary process. Grief at its core is what happens when a brain built for attachment loses the object of that attachment. It's a disruption in the reward system, a sustained stress response, a reorganization of memory and expectation. And when you define that way, when you strip away all the human-specific packaging, you start seeing it everywhere in the animal kingdom. So to understand why elephants might actually grieve longer than we do, we need to go inside the brain itself. Stay with me here because this is where it gets really interesting. Grief isn't located in one single region. It emerges from a whole network of structures working together. The amygdala processes emotional significance, basically tagging experiences as threatening or rewarding. The prefrontal cortex handles complex thought and tries to regulate emotional responses. The limbic system, which includes the hippocampus, connects emotion to memory. And when someone we love dies, these systems go into a kind of crisis. The brain keeps expecting to find that person. It keeps searching, even when the conscious mind knows rationally that the search is completely futile. Elephants have all of these structures. Their brains weigh approximately 11 pounds, 3 times the size of a human brain. The elephant cortex contains roughly 10 billion neurons, which is about the same as a human cortex. And their limbic systems are highly developed, particularly the regions tied to memory and social bonding. But here's what makes elephants genuinely remarkable. They have an unusually large and complex hippocampus, the brain structure most closely associated with forming and retrieving long-term memories. Research using non-invasive brain imaging and post-mortem studies has shown that elephants possess neural architecture capable of sustaining prolonged emotional states. And I want to be clear about something here. Their brains are not simply large. They're sophisticated in precisely the ways that would allow for deep, lasting grief. The same systems that help elephants remember watering holes from 40 years ago, those exact same systems may also keep the memory of a lost family member painfully vivid for months or even years. Now, elephants aren't alone in this. Across the animal kingdom, wherever we find complex social bonds, we find evidence of grief. Take crows. Crows hold what researchers have actually called funerals. When a crow dies, others gather around the body, calling loudly, sometimes for hours. Studies published in peer-reviewed journals have shown that crows remember the locations where other crows have died and avoid those areas for extended periods afterward. They also show heightened stress responses when they encounter dead members of their own species. This is not random behavior. This is a coordinated response to loss. Dolphins have been observed carrying dead calves for days, sometimes weeks, keeping them at the surface, as if trying to help them breathe. And in 2018, a female orca named Tahalequa made international news when she carried her dead calf for 17 days and over 1,000 miles through the Pacific Ocean. Researchers noted that she barely ate during this time, that other members of her pod took turns helping her, and that her behavior showed signs of what we would clinically describe as depression. I mean, just let that sink in for a second. Chimpanzees have been documented grooming dead infants, sitting with dying group members, and displaying what appears to be genuine, deep sadness after a loss. In one famous case, and this one really stayed with me, a chimp named Flint stopped eating after the death of his mother, Flo. He withdrew from social interaction, lost weight rapidly, and died within a month. His immune system had essentially collapsed. Scientists believe he died of grief, not of any disease. Of grief, even domestic dogs show mourning behavior. Studies have documented changes in sleeping patterns, appetite, and social behavior in dogs who've lost a canine or human companion. These changes can persist for months, and they can't be explained away by simple conditioning or routine disruption. So a pattern emerges from all of this. The depth and duration of grief responses correlate directly with the complexity of social bonding in a species. Animals who form strong, long-term attachments grieve more intensely than those who don't. This isn't coincidence. It's neuroscience. So why might elephants actually grieve longer than we do? The answer, as far as researchers can tell, comes down to memory. And honestly, this is the part I kept thinking about long after I first came across it. Elephants are among the most cognitively sophisticated animals on Earth. Full stop. Their memory capabilities are, and I don't think this word is an exaggeration, extraordinary. They can recognize individual elephants they haven't seen in over 20 years. They remember the locations of resources scattered across thousands of square miles. And here's the part that genuinely stopped me. They recall the voices of deceased family members, and they respond to recordings of those voices years after the death occurred. Years. Now, all of that is supported by something we touched on earlier, that large hippocampus. In humans, the hippocampus is basically what lets us form and retrieve autobiographical memories, the stories of our own lives. But in elephants, this same structure is proportionally even larger and more densely connected to the emotional centers of the brain, which means, and stay with me here because this is where it gets interesting, elephants may actually relive their memories of lost loved ones more vividly and more frequently than we do. And this isn't just theory. The measurable evidence backs it up pretty strongly. Studies have shown that elephants who witness the death of a close family member exhibit elevated cortisol levels. That's the primary stress hormone for extended periods. In some cases, those elevated levels persist for months. And the behavioral changes that follow, they mirror human depression almost exactly. They eat less, they sleep differently, they withdraw from social interaction, and they revisit the bones of the deceased repeatedly, touching them with their trunks, standing over them in what can only be described as contemplation. Now contrast that with how human grief works. Our grief is intense. Nobody's disputing that. But our brains are also equipped with something psychologists call resolution. We have language to process what we're feeling. We have rituals that provide a sense of closure. We have the cognitive ability to reframe a loss, to find meaning in it, to eventually move forward. Elephants may simply lack those tools. Their powerful memories keep the wound fresh, raw almost, while their brains, as far as we can tell, offer no real pathway toward healing. And I want to be clear about something here. This doesn't mean elephant grief is more real or more valid than human grief. It just means it may be different in duration. The same cognitive gifts that make elephants such remarkable survivors, the memory, the social intelligence, the emotional depth, may also, and this is kind of heartbreaking when you think about it, make them remarkable sufferers. So what does any of this teach us about ourselves? Well, first, it challenges the lines we've spent centuries drawing between human experience and animal experience. For a long time, the assumption was that only humans could truly mourn because only humans could truly love. The evidence now suggests otherwise. Love and loss aren't unique to our species. They're features of minds that are built for connection. That's it. And second, and this one I think is actually more urgent, it invites us to completely rethink what empathy even means. If elephants can grieve, then they can suffer in ways that genuinely demand our moral attention. The elephants in zoos who pace endlessly near the spot where a companion died. The captured calves who watch their mothers killed during culling operations. The families broken apart by poaching. These aren't just ecological tragedies. They're emotional ones. And understanding animal grief means accepting something uncomfortable, that our actions cause pain that persists, pain that may last far, far longer than we ever imagined. And here's what I keep coming back to after everything we've just covered. When we look at the mourning rituals of elephants, really look at them, we see something that feels almost uncomfortably familiar. Beings who don't forget, who return again and again to the places where they lost someone, who reach out and touch what remains of those they loved. And maybe, and I think this is the part worth sitting with, maybe grief isn't actually a sign of what makes humans unique. Maybe it's a sign of consciousness itself, a consequence of caring deeply about others in a world where loss is eventually inevitable for all of us. The elephants who stood over Eleanor's body weren't confused. They weren't acting on instinct in some cold mechanical sense. They knew she was gone, and still they stayed. Because that's what love does, isn't it? It refuses to let go, even when letting go is the only thing left to do. So the next time you see an elephant, really see one, consider what it might be carrying, what losses it's witnessed, what grief it's already survived, and then ask yourself something that I think is genuinely uncomfortable. Have we been measuring animal minds against the wrong standard this whole time? Because here's the thing. The question was never really whether animals can feel what we feel. The question, the more honest one, is whether we've been paying attention. If this video made you think a little differently about the minds of animals, consider subscribing. We explore science, consciousness, and the edges of what we think we know. The places where the familiar starts to get strange. Drop a comment below and tell me about an animal you believe has felt grief. I read those and honestly, they're some of my favorite conversations on this channel. And if something here resonated with you, share it with someone who might see the world a little differently afterward. Thank you for watching.